Today marks a bittersweet day in Poland and across the world as we commemorate 80 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp.
For more than 80 years, Auschwitz has stood as the most infamous symbol of human cruelty ever constructed.
Auschwitz, a Nazi extermination camp in occupied Poland. At least 1 million people, mostly Jews, were murdered there.
A place whose name alone evokes images of death, suffering, and systematic dehumanization. Yet even after decades of research, testimony, and trials, historians now believe that we were never seeing the full picture. Not because the evidence was lost, but because much of it was deliberately buried, fragmented, or left uninterpreted, scattered across thousands of documents, ruins, aerial photographs, and survivor accounts that no single human could fully assemble on their own. That is where artificial intelligence quietly entered the story. Don't skip, because we are about to reveal the shocking new secrets that the AI scan shows. The truth they thought would never be seen. In recent years, researchers working with Holocaust museums, universities, and historical institutes have begun using AI-assisted tools to reanalyze enormous archives connected to Auschwitz, including Nazi blueprints, SS correspondence, aerial reconnaissance images taken by Allied forces, post-war Soviet surveys, and thousands of survivor testimonies recorded over decades. On their own, none of these sources were new, but when AI systems were trained to compare them simultaneously, patterns began to emerge that were deeply unsettling. What the technology revealed was not a single shocking secret chamber or forgotten building, but something far more disturbing. Auschwitz was even more calculated, even more optimized, and even more deliberately concealed than historians once believed. Auschwitz was not one camp, but a complex system designed for efficiency, secrecy, and scalability. Located in occupied southern Poland, it consisted of Auschwitz I, the administrative core, Auschwitz II, Birkenau, the primary extermination site, and Auschwitz III Monowitz, a forced labor camp tied directly to German industry. Together, they formed a machine built not just to imprison and kill, but to erase evidence of those acts as they occurred. Between 1940 and 1945, an estimated 1.1 million people were eliminated within this system. The vast majority of them Jewish men, women, and children, alongside Roma, Polish political prisoners, Soviet prisoners of war, and others the Nazi regime deemed expendable. The numbers themselves are staggering, but what AI-assisted analysis has made clearer is how deliberately those numbers were hidden behind bureaucracy, architecture, and language designed to obscure reality. One of the most chilling revelations comes from the re-examination of internal SS communications. When AI systems were trained to analyze patterns of language across thousands of documents, researchers found repeated euphemisms that masked mass elimination behind administrative terminology. Terms like special treatment, resettlement, and processing, which appeared alongside logistical data such as transport schedules, supply orders, and construction requests. When cross-referenced with survivor testimony and building records, those phrases aligned with moments of peak extermination activity. The system was not chaotic, it was methodical. AI analysis of architectural plans revealed that certain buildings at Auschwitz II Birkenau were modified far more frequently than previously believed, often in ways that made them appear innocuous from above while increasing their internal capacity. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, re-examined using modern pattern recognition, confirmed anomalies beneath areas long assumed to be empty or purely functional, reinforcing survivor accounts that had once been dismissed due to lack of physical proof. One such area was Block 10 in Auschwitz I, a building already known for medical experiments, but whose role now appears even more central to Nazi pseudoscientific ambitions than previously documented. AI-assisted cross-analysis of personnel records, chemical supply orders, and post-war testimony strengthened the link between Block 10 and systematic experimentation aimed at mass sterilization, particularly targeting Jewish and Roma women. Doctors such as Karl Klauberg and Horst Schumann were not acting independently, but as part of a broader institutional effort supported by SS leadership. AI models highlighted how their experiments coincided with shifts in deportation patterns, suggesting that Auschwitz was being used not only as a killing site, but as a laboratory for refining methods of long-term population destruction. Survivor voices, long recorded but difficult to fully contextualize, gained new weight through this process. When thousands of testimonies were digitally analyzed together, recurring details that once seemed anecdotal formed consistent patterns. Survivors who had never met described identical procedures, identical rooms, identical smells, sounds, and sequences of events, reinforcing each other across time and geography in ways that left little room for doubt. One of those voices belonged to Stanisława Leszczyńska, a Polish midwife imprisoned at Auschwitz, who spoke of hearing the cries of women subjected to experiments day and night, a memory that haunted her long after liberation. Another was Marie-Claude Vaillant-Couturier, a French resistance fighter who later testified at the Nuremberg trials, describing what she called the unseeable, horrors that human beings were never meant to witness. AI did not invent these stories. It confirmed them. Perhaps the most disturbing conclusion emerging from this new wave of research is that Auschwitz was designed not just to eliminate people, but to make their suffering administratively invisible. Every step, from transport to selection to labor to death, was fragmented across departments, documents, and locations so that no single individual could claim responsibility, and no single record would ever tell the whole truth. For decades, historians pieced this reality together by hand. AI simply accelerated what survivors had always known. And as this technology continues to map the camp's physical layout, its paper trail, and its human testimonies into one unified picture, it is becoming clear that Auschwitz still has truths to confront us with. Not because they were unknown, but because they were too vast, too coordinated, and too horrifying for any one generation to fully grasp. In the next part, we will descend into one of the most terrifying places within this system, Block 10, where medicine was transformed into a weapon and where science was stripped of ethics entirely. Block 10, where science lost its humanity. Inside Auschwitz stood Block 10, a building that appeared ordinary from the outside, but functioned as one of the most disturbing examples of how knowledge can be stripped of ethics. For years, historians understood that Block 10 was used for medical research, but AI-assisted analysis has clarified that its role was not incidental or experimental in the casual sense. It was structured, systematic, and directly aligned with the long-term objectives of the Nazi regime. Block 10 operated as a controlled research environment where imprisoned women were subjected to procedures designed to advance racial policies under the cover of science. When modern researchers used AI tools to analyze personnel records, chemical supply logs, and internal correspondence together, a clear pattern emerged. The activity inside Block 10 increased during specific transport periods, suggesting coordination between deportations and the work carried out inside the building. One of the central figures associated with Block 10 was Karl Klauberg, a medical specialist whose stated goal was to develop rapid methods of preventing reproduction among groups the Nazi state targeted. His work focused primarily on Jewish women, many of whom were selected because they were young and physically strong. Survivors later described severe physical distress following procedures, including prolonged illness and internal damage that left many permanently impaired. AI-assisted comparison of survivor testimonies with preserved documentation revealed striking consistency in how these procedures were described, even when accounts were recorded decades apart. Chemical procurement records matched the time frames survivors recalled being taken into Block 10, reinforcing the conclusion that these actions were part of an organized program rather than isolated incidents. Another physician connected to Block 10 was Horst Schumann, whose work involved exposure to intense radiation aimed at studying its effects on the human body. Survivors later described severe burns, loss of mobility, and long-term health complications following these procedures. Many never recovered, and some were later removed from the camp's population once they were deemed no longer useful. AI analysis of equipment maintenance records confirmed that specialized machinery was repeatedly calibrated during the periods Schumann was active at Auschwitz, lending further weight to survivor accounts. These procedures disproportionately affected Roma prisoners, a group targeted by Nazi racial policy and subjected to systematic discrimination throughout the camp system. Block 10 was also connected to broader medical research within Auschwitz that involved deliberate exposure to disease and extreme conditions. These actions were framed internally as research, but survivors consistently described them as experiences marked by extreme suffering and neglect. AI-assisted synthesis of thousands of testimonies revealed repeating descriptions of symptoms, treatment environments, and staff behavior, forming a coherent picture that no single account could fully establish on its own. Among those who witnessed this reality was Stanisława Leszczyńska, a Polish midwife imprisoned in Auschwitz, whose testimony has gained renewed significance through modern analysis. She described hearing constant cries of distress from women held in Block 10, a detail echoed independently by many others. Despite the conditions, she remained committed to preserving life whenever possible, later explaining that helping others survive was her form of resistance. The most infamous name associated with Auschwitz, Józef Mengele, was driven by an obsession with heredity and conducted research on twins. AI-assisted comparison of survivor statements revealed recurring descriptions of invasive procedures and forced comparisons between siblings. Many of the children involved did not survive the camp, and those who did carried lifelong physical and emotional consequences. What AI analysis has clarified is not only what occurred in Block 10, but how normalized it became within the camp's administrative system. These activities were scheduled, supplied, and recorded, using clinical language that concealed their true impact. Responsibility was divided across departments, ensuring that no single document told the full story. As Allied forces approached in early 1945, camp authorities attempted to destroy records and eliminate witnesses, but enough fragments survived. Decades later, AI has allowed historians to reconnect those fragments, confirming what survivors had always said but struggled to prove. Block 10 stands today as a warning of what happens when science is separated from ethics and human dignity. It reminds us that education and intelligence alone do not prevent abuse when ideology replaces compassion. Block 11, the camp's engine of fear. Within Auschwitz also stood Block 11, a structure designed not for labor or research, but for control. Known among prisoners as the punishment block, it functioned as the camp's psychological core, a place meant to be seen, heard, and feared. While other parts of Auschwitz operated with distance and concealment, Block 11 was deliberately visible. Its purpose was simple and calculated: to demonstrate what happened to those who resisted, disobeyed, or were simply deemed inconvenient. AI-assisted analysis of camp maps, disciplinary records, and post-war testimonies has helped historians better understand how Block 11 fit into the broader machinery of Auschwitz. It was not an isolated space for rare punishment, but a central tool used repeatedly to enforce compliance across the entire camp. The building housed the camp's internal police, interrogation rooms, and basement cells, creating a direct pipeline from accusation to punishment with little to no oversight. The basement of Block 11 contained a network of confinement cells that varied in size and purpose. Some were intended for group detention, while others were designed for isolation. Survivors consistently described conditions marked by darkness, lack of air, and extreme overcrowding. When AI tools compared hundreds of independent testimonies, recurring descriptions emerged that matched the physical dimensions of these cells, reinforcing their accuracy and revealing how systematically these spaces were used. One of the most notorious forms of confinement involved standing cells, extremely small compartments in which multiple prisoners were forced to remain upright for extended periods. These cells were not designed for interrogation or information gathering. Their function was endurance-breaking confinement. Prisoners subjected to this treatment were often returned to the camp population visibly weakened, serving as living warnings to others. Another form of punishment involved starvation confinement, where individuals were locked away with no food and minimal water. These cases were often imposed after escape attempts or acts of resistance. AI-assisted reconstruction of disciplinary logs shows that these punishments increased during periods of heightened tension, such as mass deportations or nearby resistance activity, suggesting they were used strategically to maintain order through fear rather than justice. The courtyard between Block 11 and the neighboring buildings played an equally important role. This open space was used for public executions carried out by firing squads, deliberately positioned so other prisoners could witness the outcome. AI comparison of execution records, camp schedules, and survivor recollections confirmed that these events were coordinated to coincide with roll calls, ensuring maximum visibility and psychological impact. Among the most widely remembered figures connected to Block 11 is Maximilian Kolbe, a Polish priest imprisoned at Auschwitz, who volunteered to take the place of another prisoner selected for starvation confinement. His decision was witnessed by many and recorded independently across multiple survivor accounts. AI-assisted testimony analysis confirmed the remarkable consistency of these descriptions even when recorded decades apart. Kolbe's actions did not change the structure of the camp, but they left a lasting impression on those who witnessed them, offering a rare moment of moral clarity within a system designed to erase it. Block 11 also functioned as a center for interrogation. Prisoners brought there were questioned under conditions intended to overwhelm rather than extract reliable information. Survivors later described repeated beatings, sleep deprivation, and psychological pressure, experiences that align closely with documented interrogation practices used throughout the Nazi camp system. AI analysis helped establish how frequently prisoners moved between Block 11 and other sections of the camp, showing that punishment was not an endpoint, but part of an ongoing cycle of control. Importantly, Block 11 was not reserved only for political prisoners or resistance members. Many individuals were confined there for minor infractions, misunderstandings, or simply to meet punishment quotas. This randomness amplified fear, as no behavior could guarantee safety. The uncertainty was intentional. As the war drew to a close and Soviet forces advanced in January 1945, authorities attempted to destroy records connected to Block 11 and hurriedly removed many prisoners. Yet the structure itself remained, and so did the memories carried by survivors. When these memories were later analyzed together using AI tools, they formed a remarkably consistent account of how punishment operated not as discipline, but as terror management. Block 11 stands today as a reminder that Auschwitz was not sustained by secrecy alone, but by visibility. Fear was not hidden. It was displayed. The suffering imposed there was meant to travel beyond its walls, shaping behavior throughout the camp. The system beyond the barbed wire. While places like Block 10 and Block 11 reveal how suffering was concentrated into specific buildings, Auschwitz cannot be understood by its structures alone, because the true horror lay in how the entire camp functioned as a system. It was not just a site of imprisonment, punishment, or forced labor. It was a carefully organized process designed to strip people of identity, agency, and ultimately existence, often without them fully realizing what was happening until it was too late. One of the most disturbing elements uncovered through AI-assisted analysis is how deception was built into every stage of arrival. Transports arrived daily from across occupied Europe, carrying families who had been told they were being resettled or relocated for work. Many arrived with suitcases labeled carefully with names and birth dates, believing they would retrieve their belongings later. AI analysis of transport records and confiscated property inventories confirmed that this deception was systematic, not incidental. The illusion of order was intentional because panic disrupted efficiency. Upon arrival, selections took place almost immediately. SS doctors and guards decided within seconds who would be sent to forced labor and who would be sent elsewhere. Survivors consistently described the confusion, the separation of families, and the speed at which these decisions were made. When AI tools compared thousands of testimonies, the same patterns emerged repeatedly, confirming that these selections followed standardized procedures designed to maximize labor output while removing those deemed unfit. Beyond the camp fences, Auschwitz was deeply integrated into the German war economy. Auschwitz III Monowitz existed primarily to supply the forced labor to industrial partners, most notably the chemical company IG Farben. AI-assisted reconstruction of labor rosters, production quotas, and correspondence between SS officials and industrial managers showed how closely productivity targets were tied to prisoner intake. Workers who collapsed from exhaustion were removed and replaced, treated as interchangeable units rather than human beings. Living conditions across the camp system were deliberately inadequate. Food rations were calculated to keep prisoners alive just long enough to work, while sanitation and medical care were intentionally insufficient. Disease spread rapidly, not as an unintended consequence, but as an accepted outcome. AI comparison of mortality records with ration changes revealed that mortality rates rose predictably during periods of increased labor demand, reinforcing the conclusion that survival was never a priority. Resistance, however, never fully disappeared. Prisoners found small ways to push back, often at great risk. Some sabotaged factory output by damaging tools or slowing production. Others smuggled information, shared food, or helped the sick survive a little longer. AI-assisted review of post-war testimonies revealed patterns of quiet cooperation that crossed national and religious lines, acts rarely recorded officially but repeated across hundreds of survivor accounts. One of the most significant acts of resistance occurred in October 1944, when members of the Sonderkommando, prisoners forced to work in the crematoria, staged an uprising. Using explosives smuggled into the camp by female prisoners working in a nearby munitions factory, they damaged one of the crematoria before the revolt was crushed. AI analysis of camp security logs confirmed unusual disruptions that day, aligning with survivor descriptions that had long been questioned due to lack of documentation. As defeat became inevitable in early 1945, camp authorities began attempting to erase evidence. Records were destroyed, buildings damaged, and prisoners forced onto evacuation marches in brutal winter conditions. AI-assisted analysis of evacuation routes and survivor timelines confirmed that these marches were not spontaneous retreats, but organized efforts to prevent liberation from revealing the full scope of the crimes. When Soviet forces finally entered Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, they found thousands of survivors in critical condition and evidence of a system abandoned in haste. Piles of personal belongings, empty barracks, and incomplete destruction efforts revealed just how much the camp's operators had relied on secrecy and distance from public view. AI reconstruction of post-liberation photographs helped historians match survivor testimony to physical locations that had changed or deteriorated over time. Perhaps the most important contribution of AI has been its ability to restore individuality to victims long reduced to numbers. By connecting transport lists, confiscated belongings, and testimony fragments, researchers have been able to reconstruct partial life stories that had been scattered across archives. Names once buried in paperwork now reappear as people with families, professions, and futures that were deliberately erased. Auschwitz was not only a place of extreme cruelty, it was also a warning embedded in systems, language, and bureaucracy. It showed how ordinary tools, schedules, and records could be used to produce extraordinary harm when ethics are removed. AI has not uncovered new evil. It has clarified how visible that evil always was, hidden not by mystery, but by scale. The moments that should never have happened. Auschwitz was not only defined by routine suffering and systematic cruelty, it was also shaped by moments that broke the expected order of the camp, moments so tense, dangerous, and improbable that they still feel unreal decades later. These were events that were never meant to happen, incidents that briefly disrupted the machinery of control and revealed just how fragile that system could be when pushed to its limits. One of the most shocking revelations confirmed through modern analysis involves the scale of deception that surrounded the camp's true purpose. For years, even many prisoners did not fully understand where they were. Trains arrived daily, orchestras sometimes played near the ramps, and signs were posted to maintain the illusion of relocation and labor. AI-assisted comparison of arrival schedules, photographs, and survivor recollections showed that these performances were carefully timed. Calm reduced resistance, and confusion increased compliance. The most chilling part is how effective this strategy was, even in a place built entirely on fear. Yet there were moments when that illusion shattered. On several occasions, newly arrived prisoners realized the truth almost immediately and resisted orders, refused to move, or tried to flee. These incidents were rare and brutally suppressed, but AI-assisted analysis of camp incident logs revealed spikes in disciplinary actions that aligned with survivor accounts of panic breaking out on the ramps. These moments were chaotic, loud, and dangerous for the guards themselves, which is why the camp leadership worked so hard to prevent them from happening again. Another extraordinary episode involved escapes that were never supposed to succeed. Auschwitz was designed to be inescapable, surrounded by fences, patrols, and informant networks within the prisoner population. And yet, people still tried. AI reconstruction of escape attempts using guard reports, roll call discrepancies, and post-war testimonies revealed that dozens of escape efforts were made, many more than previously acknowledged. Most failed, but a small number succeeded long enough to carry information beyond the camp's boundaries. One of the most significant of these efforts involved prisoners who escaped and later provided early warnings about what was happening inside Auschwitz. Their reports reached resistance networks and even allied governments, but were often dismissed as exaggerated or impossible. AI-assisted analysis of diplomatic archives has shown how these warnings were delayed, filtered, or ignored, not because they lacked credibility, but because their implications were too extreme to accept at the time. Inside the camp, resistance took quieter, but no less risky forms. Prisoners sabotaged factory equipment, altered production output, and passed messages using coded language. Women working in munitions factories secretly diverted small amounts of explosives, an act that would later play a critical role in one of the camp's most daring acts of defiance. AI analysis of factory records revealed unexplained discrepancies in output that match survivor accounts of deliberate interference. That interference culminated in October 1944, when members of the Sonderkommando staged an uprising. These prisoners, forced to work in the crematoria, knew they were unlikely to survive long-term. Using smuggled explosives, they damaged part of the extermination infrastructure, an act that sent shockwaves through the camp. Although the revolt was crushed, AI-assisted examination of security logs confirmed that camp operations were disrupted for days afterward, contradicting earlier claims that the uprising had little impact. Another rarely discussed but deeply unsettling moment involved the camp's sudden shifts in policy as defeat loomed. As Allied forces advanced, orders became inconsistent. Some transports were halted, others were rushed through. AI-assisted timeline reconstruction showed abrupt changes in prisoner movement that reflected panic rather than control. Guards destroyed documents, dismantled equipment, and attempted to erase evidence, revealing that even those running the camp understood how fragile their secrecy had become. Then came the evacuations. As the front lines approached, thousands of prisoners were forced out of the camp on foot during winter conditions. These evacuations were not chaotic retreats, but hurried attempts to move people away from approaching forces. AI-assisted analysis of routes, survivor timelines, and weather records confirmed that these marches were calculated but ruthless, prioritizing concealment over human survival. Many did not make it to their destinations, and those who did carried memories that would shape their lives forever. When Soviet forces entered Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, they expected a military installation. Instead, they found evidence of a system abandoned in haste. Barracks still contained personal belongings. Storehouses were filled with items taken from prisoners. Survivors were found alive, but barely able to comprehend that the camp was no longer under SS control. AI-assisted matching of liberation photographs with modern site scans has helped historians identify exactly where these encounters took place, grounding survivor memories in physical space. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of these events is how close the world came to never knowing them at all. Had evacuations happened earlier, had records been destroyed more thoroughly, had survivors not lived long enough to speak, Auschwitz might have left behind only ruins without meaning. AI has shown just how narrow the margin was between remembrance and erasure. These moments remind us that Auschwitz was not only a place of suffering, but a place where control was constantly tested, challenged, and, in rare instances, broken. In the next part, we will explore how denial, distortion, and misinformation emerged after the war, and why modern technology now plays a crucial role in protecting historical truth from being rewritten or forgotten. Why the past still demands an answer. When the war ended, Auschwitz did not disappear. Its buildings remained, its documents scattered, and its survivors carried memories that would shape the rest of their lives. Yet even with trials, testimonies, and museums, the full truth of what happened there was never simple to preserve. Time erased details, denial questioned facts, and distortion tried to blur responsibility. What modern technology has changed is not the past itself, but our ability to protect it from being fragmented or forgotten. AI-assisted research has allowed historians to bring together pieces that once existed in isolation: transport records without names, testimonies without locations, photographs without context. By connecting these fragments, the story becomes harder to deny and impossible to dismiss. Patterns replace doubt, consistency replaces speculation, and survivor voices gain renewed strength, not as memories standing alone, but as part of a larger, verified whole. This matters because Auschwitz was not an accident of history. It was the result of choices made gradually, normalized through language, systems, and obedience. Understanding how it functioned helps explain how ordinary structures can be turned toward extraordinary harm when accountability disappears and humanity is reduced to numbers. The purpose of remembering is not to relive fear or despair, but to recognize warning signs. Dehumanization rarely begins with violence. It begins with classification, silence, and indifference. Auschwitz shows where that path can lead when it goes unchallenged. As survivors fade from living memory, the responsibility to carry their truth shifts to the present. Technology now plays a role they once carried alone, ensuring that evidence remains visible and connections remain intact. But tools are only as meaningful as the people who use them. Stories like this survive only when people choose to listen. If you found this meaningful, smash that like button, subscribe for more documentaries, and share for more thrilling and opening videos like this. Remembering history only works when it's passed on.